It's that time already. We're now just 2 weeks away from the OP12 pre-release events. So in this video, we're going to be covering everything you need to know about the pre-release events. Whether you're a new player or a more experienced player, we'll have all the event info, some general tips for the pre-release format, and some top text that I've picked out specifically for OP12. Starting off with the event info, the pre-release events are going to run from August 15th through 21st at, of course, the official Bandai stores, as well as your LGSs, and these can be run as either constructed or sealed. Constructed is the format that we play every single week, be it at locals, on the sim, at regionals, wherever you may be. So I do prefer these events being run as sealed, because it's a different format that the vast majority of this video will be covering. If your store is running these as constructed events, I think it is a real shame because you won't get the full pre-release experience. But if you're here for sealed, we've got lots of info, so strap in. For participating, you will get not only this Kobe promo, you'll also get the Rainbow Luffy leader. We'll be talking about him in a short time. This Kobe promo does look to be pretty good in the Kobe deck. I've seen a lot of lists running him at around a 2 of, so getting your hands on a couple of these will be pretty nice. This is also coming as a regional promo, so don't stress too much. But these pre-releases will be a decent way to get this, and this is probably the best pre-release promo that we've seen in a while. You'll also get a pre-release pack containing 2 either common or uncommon cards from the set, with a release event stamp. This is a shoe that I got from the last set. You can see here the pre-release event stamp in the bottom right. They look alright, but they're not too flashy, just something to bling out your favourite decks with. And if you are lucky enough to win this event, you're going to get this full art hollow foil version of the Kobe promo with a winner stamp. This version of the card will probably go for a good few bucks. These pre-release stamped winner cards usually go for between maybe $10 to $20, depending on how playable the card is. And this looks to be one of the best ones we've seen in a while, so who knows. So next up, what to bring. One of the nicest things about these events, if they're running sealed, is if you're a brand new player, you do not need to bring any cards. You need your sleeves, a playmat, some dice, a leader card if needed, and we will discuss leaders on the next couple of slides. If you don't have these leaders, you can probably just rock up and people will be happy to lend you a leader. And also Don cards. And again, if you don't have Don cards, don't worry. Someone at your store will be able to give you them. Or you could even just use like backwards cards. So in terms of the sealed format itself, you're going to open 6 packs of One Piece cards. And you're going to build a 40 card deck. That's 40, not 50 like in constructed, just 40. And to make the deck building a little bit more easy and interesting, there are no color restrictions. Meaning if you're playing the red Luffy leader, you can include green cards, you can include blue cards, no problem. And there are also no card count restrictions. So if you pull 5 of the same vanilla, you can include them all. And the rest of your pulls are your sideboard. So after round 1, say there's a card in your deck that you didn't read properly, or you just didn't understand the wording of it, you can swap that out with one of the other cards that you got in your 6 packs. And the reason we do this is so that newer players who might not know what all the interactions and the wordings mean, they're not punished for not knowing that. They can just swap it out for the next game, and you don't have a dead card in your deck that doesn't do what you thought it did. Next up, some general tips for sealed. Board control is very important. This is obviously true in constructed as well, but in pre-release, the characters tend to be a little bit larger on average, even if there are not as many of them, just because of the prevalence of vanilla cards being very powerful, as well as cards with vanilla stat lines being very powerful. And these large characters are obviously going to require a lot of counter, so if you can deal with them by battle, it's usually preferable to do so than let them just sit there forever. Blockers are obviously invaluable in pre-release. There's much less removal. However, I will say specifically for this set, they're not going to be quite as important as usual, because there are a number of cards in this set that are designed to get around blockers, either by resting them or bypassing them. We'll cover that more as we go through the video, but do still understand that blockers are still very good, and you'll probably be playing most blockers that you pull. Also, know when you've lost the board. Just like in constructed, setting up to win in 2 turns is as valid a strategy in pre-release, especially with some of these outs that we'll cover later, like giving your leader unblockable or resting characters. Well, it's going to be easier than before to set up to win in 2 turns. So once you've lost the board, don't fight a futile war. Make your plans and go for lethal. So in terms of leaders for sealed events, there are 2 ways of doing it. The first way that Bandai recommend, and I also endorse, is the Rainbow Luffy leader. The other way that some stores do still choose to do it is by allowing you to use any leader that you have in your binder or that you pull from your packs. On this slide, we're going to be going over the Rainbow Luffy. I've got all the best leaders for the choose a leader style on a slide coming up. Next up, a brief note on Rainbow Luffy. Here he is. He has 5,000 power, 5 life, and the effect that this leader is treated as a card with all names, types, attributes, and colors, according to the rules. So this means that anything that says, if your leader is X, if your leader has Y, will work with Luffy. For example, this Saul says on his trigger, if your leader is Nico Robin, you can play this card. Luffy counts as Robin, so you can use the trigger to play out Saul. Kung Fu Dugong says that if you have another Kung Fu Dugong in play, he will gain blocker, and this Luffy having all names obviously counts as a Kung Fu Dugong. And lastly, Perona demands that your leader has the slash attribute to activate her effect. Well, your leader has all attributes, so whilst it says strike in the top right, he also counts as having slash. So what if your store's not doing Rainbow Luffy? Well, firstly, minor apologies, because I do think as these sets are going on, there are more and more leader types and such locked cards in each set, which makes Rainbow Luffy even more appealing, I think, to run for these events. However, these are some of the best options if your store is doing pick a leader. Red Sanji is broadly the best option from the past. Just giving all your characters Rush is great, because Rush is incredibly rare in pre-release events. And of course, it means that all your characters will just be extra aggressive compared to your opponent. Bonnie is an interesting defensive leader, letting you rest your opponent's characters, potentially allowing you to attack them before they've had a chance to attack. And then some of the older favourites were Captain Kidd, who can restand. I think this guy's a little outdated by now, but he is still an option if you don't have access to one of these other leaders. And Yamato is also an option. Yamato struggles into blockers a lot, and some of the cards that allow you to get around blockers are leader locked, which obviously Yamato doesn't have the same text as Rainbow Luffy, so you wouldn't be able to use those with her necessarily, which can make Yamato a little tricky to use. In general, I think if you're running an older leader, I would recommend Red Sanji. Of the new leaders, Sanji, Koala, Rosie, Kuzan, and Rayleigh. Don't waste your time. These are all heavily locked around their archetype, so they're not going to be useful to you in a pre-release environment. However, Zoro, I think, could be. This guy being able to battle your opponent's character and still battle their leader, or a character twice if they have some very large characters on the board, is going to be pretty powerful. Not only that, but some of the most powerful cards in the set are leader locked to him, so even though you won't get to use everything that Rainbow Luffy can, some of the more important ones are just locked to Zoro, so that's still pretty good. I'm interested to see how Zoro performs in pre-releases. I can see him just being worse than Sanji, but the red Sanji. Not this one's terrible. I could see him still being worse than the red Sanji, but I think there is real potential for Zoro in non-Rainbow Luffy metas. Moving on, what should you include in your deck? This is a very baseline. Obviously, it's going to depend on your card pool, but at a baseline, all 2Ks, all vanillas, all blockers, all cards with vanilla stat lines. I like to call them Vanill-ish cards. Powerful plays, which I've got a slide of at the end. And then after that, you're going to have to use your intuition. Read the cards, do your best, and don't forget about the sideboarding rules. If you do make a mistake, you can always change it in round 2. The reason this all 2Ks is asterisked is because there are quite a lot of 2Ks in this set. So if you pull an extreme number, you may end up cutting some of the less powerful ones. So in terms of 2Ks, we have 4 common 2Ks in this set, which is around the same as last time. Trafalgar Lammie is probably the best of the bunch. At the end of the game, you can use this to effectively give your leader 1,000 extra power in Rainbow Luffy format. Betty, Paddy, and Zephyr all don't really do a lot. Zephyr's effect is fine, but the fact that he makes you trash too, and we're not Kuzan, so we don't get to draw those back, is pretty damaging. We also have 3 uncommon 2Ks in the set, excluding the vanilla 2Ks, which are on the next slide. These are all a little bit better. Morley being 8 cost isn't actually that relevant for this event, but could get you around a couple of cards here and there. Kazaburo is probably one of the better ones. If your opponent has any 2-cost chump blockers, he can rest them at the end of the game. And Hino is the same. Hino is slightly better than Kazaburo. She can deny the blocker from up to a 4-cost, which is just slightly more relevant. And we do have 2 rare 2Ks in the set. Baby 5 has a nice trigger if you're playing Rainbow Luffy. And Sora, amusingly, is locked to Sanji, which, if you're playing this in red Sanji, you can still use this. You do have to have equal or less Don than your opponent, but if you somehow do, well, you can ramp one back and then draw a card, which is fine. So the way that the ratios of these work within your 6 packs, you should expect to get 1 copy of each common 2k, around 0.5 copies of each uncommon 2k, and then rares, a bit harder to judge, maybe you'll get 1 rare 2k in total. Moving on to the vanilla 2ks, and these are 2ks with no effect, but great stat lines. Generally, these are the strongest 2ks, although I would put a particular note on Hina in particular being very powerful. But these are just great plays to help fill out your curve. We have 156 and 167 vanilla 2k in each type. None of them particularly interact with anything else in the set, but they are just nice pieces to fill out your curve. And this is how the 2k counts compare to OP11. You can see they're broadly the same, slightly less of the uncommon rare 2ks. So I do think you'll get slightly lower 2ks than you did in OP11. However, this is still a really high amount. 11 is still basically a constructed deck. And do remember you're playing 40 card decks rather than 50. So this is a greater ratio compared to constructed, potentially. Moving on, I want to make a quick note on these 4. So these are not 2ks, but they're kind of 2ks. At least 3 of them. So if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, these are 3 more 2ks. 2 common ones and 1 rare one. And these are excellent. All of these effects are really, really powerful. Armament Haki, just giving you an extra 1000 power when you're going for lethal at the end of the game, is solid. Because obviously your leader, if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, is Silver's Rayleigh. So you get all these effects. Conqueror's Haki is probably the best defensive event in the game, especially if your opponent manages to go wide. Like, the wider your opponent's board gets, the more value you're going to get out of this Conqueror's Haki. And at a baseline, if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, it's 2k for anything. And the same for To Never Doubt That is power. This gives your leader unblockable, which is insane. Once you get your opponent down to 0, you pretty much just win, save for crazy counter event plays from them. But this also being a 2k, again, just gives you double value out of this. So if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, you can count this as like 2 more common 2ks that you'll get in your pool, which could make it even bigger than OP11 potentially. Observation Haki is a bit iffier, but I would still very strongly recommend playing this in Rainbow Luffy, because you can attach the Don to your leader. Just getting to look at the top 4 for basically anything, because there's not going to be that many cards in your deck with a cost of 2 or less, is going to be really nice for your consistency and just help fill out your curve. Moving on to vanillas, we've got quite a range this time. We've got a 2-4, 3-3-5s, 4-6, 2-5-7s, 3-6-8s, and 2-8-10s. I would strongly avoid Baby 5. A 4k stat line is basically worthless. You don't want to play characters with a smaller stat line than your opponent's leaders, unless they're like blockers or have useful onboard effects, and Baby 5 very much doesn't. However, all of these other vanillas you're probably going to include in your deck. I'll put a note that 3-5s can also be a bit dodgy, but if you are going first, playing one of them on 3 is better than swinging 8s. Next up, we've got Vanill-ish cards, and there aren't as many of these in this set as there has been before sometimes. So Vanill-ish cards, as I like to call them, are cards with vanilla stat lines. So in Sanji's case, he's a 3-5, but he's not a vanilla because he has text. So he's Vanill-ish. And usually this text makes them better. So Sanji, for example, gets extra power for 5 events in your trash, which isn't really going to happen, but he does have a little bit of removal protection, which could come up. In terms of these other ones, we've got Zoro and Shanks, which Zoro, if you're playing a slash deck, which is Rainbow Luffy or Green Zoro, not Red Sanji. If you're playing Luffy or Zoro, this is a 4-6 and also can't be KO'd in battle by other slash attribute cards, which in Rainbow Luffy mirrors is going to be pretty relevant because their Rainbow Luffy is also slash, so their leader just can't kill this guy in battle, which could be pretty nice for sticking power. This guy also has counter, so that's a nice little benefit. Shanks is a 4-6 blocker that can turn your bricks into 2Ks, which is really, really good. Big fan of this Shanks. If you get a copy of him, absolutely include it. Tashigi is like one of the best cards in the set. This card is giga busted, especially if you're playing Green Zoro. I mean, this is just obviously a no-brainer. But even in Rainbow Luffy, this can just rest your opponent's previous play and still let you swing 8 into it. And if, like I say, if you can control the board, That's the most important thing. So resting something and giving 3 Don, you're effectively playing a 2/7 that rests to 6. Kuzan's an interesting one, and this does lead me into a little bit of a problem we have with the blue cards in this set, in that they all force you to trash cards because of the Kuzan leader's desire to cycle, right? But this does mean in this format, you're not really playing blue Kuzan, so these do all go quite heavily neg. However, I think losing 1 card for the effect of freezing one of your opponent's guys for a turn is definitely worth it, especially on a 6/8 body. This Crocodile's crazy. This guy's a common. You're going to get this card, include it. It's really, really good. So this is a 6/8 on your opponent's attack. Don -1. If your leader has broke works, which Rainbow Luffy does, one of your leader or characters gets 2k for the battle. This is literally a free 2k. Like, sure, you do Don -1, but once you get to the end portions of the game, when you're at like 8, 9, 10 Don, being able to use 1 Don, which you're probably going to draw back anyway, for a free 2k is wild. Watch out for this Crocodile. He's really, really good. In terms of blockers, the quality is actually pretty high this time. Helmeppo's on block, letting you rest a 5 to potentially get out of 2 swings is nice. Borsalino and Rainbow Luffy can be a 6k blocker, which is fine. Outside of Rainbow Luffy, I wouldn't play this guy, obviously, because you're not going to get this effect. Hack, again, in Rainbow Luffy, it's very good. When he goes down, he pops a 4, you're getting an extra bit of value. And the last focus blocker is Shanks, who we've already discussed, but again, that extra effect of turning your bricks into 2ks is brilliant. Sabo and Bonnie both give you a bit of draw. Sabo's does come at the cost of a life, but generally, I think it's probably still worth it getting that cycle and playing a blocker, a 5/6 blocker. But you do have to be a little careful on when you play this guy. Bonnie is just a no-brainer if you get it. The 6/7 blockers are brilliant. 7k blockers are just a great stat line because it's hard for your opponent to just swing 7s, especially if they want to play on curve. Law and Saul are just vanilla 6/7 blockers. Robin is only a blocker in Rainbow Luffy, but does have the effect where you can trash a card and make your opponent trash 2. So if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, definitely include the Robin if you get her. And we don't need to discuss Mihawk. If you're a fan of the OP12 meta, you know how crazy this card's going to be. It's a 4/8 blocker. What's more to say? Moving on to the rest of the blockers, we've got Ivankov, who is basically just a chump blocker. Koshiro can be a bit of protection, but there's not that much removal effects in this set, so he again is mostly just a chump blocker. Ippon Matsu is actually pretty good. As long as you have a slash leader, which again is mainly going to be Rainbow Luffy, but also Green Zoro. He can't be rested by your opponent's effect, and that is relevant for 1 or 2 cards in this set, as we've already discussed with the Chigi. Now, these purple cards are all a bit iffy, because they all require you to have 4 or more events in your trash to get an extra effect. For Kane, he is not a blocker if you don't have 4 more events, and the same with Ivankov. Ivankov's probably still worth playing because he's like a 6/7 with a decent effect to grab back an event on KO. However, the fact that these aren't going to be blockers a lot of the time, because 4 events is a lot, is a bit of a shame. Reiju is always a 4/5 blocker, so again, I'd probably just include her. But if you do get 4 events in the trash, this character is like a 4/7 blocker, which is wild. Next up, let's talk about some events. Activate main events you might want to activate. Well, Luffy's the man who become the king of the pirates, Zoro edition. Can restand your leader either in Zoro or Rainbow Luffy. Dead Man's Game is one of the best events in the set. When you're going for game, being allowed to just rest 2 of your opponent's guys or Dons if they've got counter events is brilliant, and of course this is a 3k counter. Birth Burst is a maybe. It's basically Pilaf, but also has the option to bounce a 4 if you're playing Rainbow Luffy. Luffy's the man in both Red Sanji, as amusingly, as well as Rainbow Luffy, is just a top 3 search for whatever you like, so you may as well include this. Ursa's Shock, you're probably not going to have an 8 cost character. There are a couple of Rev Army characters that get the +4, but outside of that, in specifically Rainbow Luffy, this is just a 4 that pops a 4, so this is like a maybe. And Slam Gibson is also a maybe. You do get to remove basically anything for 6 Don. However, the fact that you put it in life does heal your opponents, so that's not ideal. You could use it to heal yourself in a pinch though, so I do think it's probably worth it given that it is a 3k counter as well. And like we discussed earlier with the Rayleigh unblockable, this technique extinguishes all sound. It can also give you a Law unblockable, so your Rainbow Luffy leader. In terms of pure counter events, Iceblock Pheasant Peck is a 1/4. You do have to trash a card, but it could be worth it still, even though you won't get to draw that card back. Conquer Say, you can use the main in both Red Sandy and Rainbow, But generally, if you can get to this condition where you have 4 more events in the trash, being a 1 cost 4k with no downside is brilliant. And 2 sword style Light Ashamon I've got on this page, because I think you're going to use the counter more than the main. There's not usually that many 4 cost characters in pre-release. It tends to be a lot of 5s and higher, especially with this card pool. But it's still a 3k counter event. So in terms of the top cards to look out for, we've discussed a lot of these already. I think green in general is just winning this pre-release. The red cards are all very locked to having a lot of events. Same with a lot of the purple cards, but the events need to be in the trash. The blue cards all make you trash a bunch of stuff. But the green cards are all generic and really, really good, especially for Rainbow Luffy and Green Zoro. The Robin and the Hack we discussed on the blocker page. These are really powerful cards if you're playing Rainbow Luffy. Hack getting removal and Robin getting hand scam. Kalgara, once he comes down, basically reads if you damage your opponent, you get to draw an extra card. And card draw in pre-release is incredibly good. Effectively getting to draw probably around 4 extra cards during the course of the game is great. And if you do have any cards that would take your own life, such as that Sabo blocker that we talked about earlier, that also procs Kalgara, so that's pretty cool. Dofi is about the only rush option in the set. There is a Jinbei that has a rush, but you need to reveal 2 events, so if you don't have them, tough luck. He's also pretty annoying that if your opponent takes him out by KO, you get a heal. Pretty good. And last but not least, he was hiding. We have the Kuma. Kuma obviously going to be a very powerful card if you're lucky enough to pull it. Getting you 1 heal on play and another heal if your opponent decides to take it out. You can't sniff at that. And these are sort of my more sleeper picks, the cards that I've not seen as many people talking about, but I think could be incredibly powerful for this format. Gyukimaru, specifically in Green Zoro, if you do decide to give that leader a go, is great. But even in Rainbow Luffy, the fact that you can just rest your opponent's guy some of the time is pretty nice. Zoro, again, we talked about him earlier, but just to reiterate, in Luffy Mirrors, he can't be KO'd by the leader, which is great. There's also just quite a lot of slash in this set, especially among green, but even in other colours. Helmeppo, getting to effectively get out 2 hits. If your opponent has 2 5 or less cost characters, it's brilliant. Bonnie and Law can both buff your leader up by 1000 power during your opponent's turn. Law's not going to hit much else because there aren't really any Rosie or Heart Pirates characters in this set that are that exciting. And Bonnie is very much a one-time thing because she will just get KO'd. But it's effectively a pseudo blocker, so it could be worse. And again, these both work in Rainbow Luffy only. And the rest of these cards also only work in Rainbow Luffy, so I think you can see why I'm big on Rainbow Luffy at the minute. Sakazuki just letting you draw 2 is great. You're not going to want to use this activate main a ton because you won't get the cycle like you would with Kuzan leader. But if you really need an extra Don here and there, maybe this could come in clutch. Karasu, scamming cards out of your opponent's hand is great. We talked about Conqueror's Haki earlier being one of the best counter events in this set, and I still think this Crocodile's ridiculous. We talked about him before, I'm not going to go over it again, but this is crazy. 3 2Ks, what a time to be alive. So, OP12 specific tips. There's quite a high 2K count. Not as high as in OP11, but I still think swinging 5 and 7 is most likely better than swinging 6. Back in OP10, I recommended swinging 6, because there were so few 2Ks in the set. But for the last couple of sets with those vanilla 2Ks that they've started printing, that's mostly been fixed. So again, I would recommend swinging 5 and 7, or 2K over. There is a high blocker count in this set, however, given there's 2 unblockable effects in the To Never Doubt That It's Power, and this sound extinguishes, as well as Dead Man's Game, there's going to be a lot of ways for your opponent to rest your stuff at the end of the game, as well as, of course, that Tashigi and the Kuina if they decide to play that. We didn't cover that one earlier. That card's a little iffier. And as a result, blockers, I think, at the end of the game are going to be less valuable than in most pre-releases. So don't be afraid to use your blockers early to protect your life. Similarly to OP11, the 2K quality is very high. I'd actually say it's plenty even higher than OP11. You've got all those vanilla 2Ks, which are just good on-curve plays. And then having a couple of useful ones, things like the Baby 5 2K, as well as Hina, is pretty nice. It's going to make, obviously, your deck slightly less powerful than some of the older pre-releases, because there are fewer vanillas, and as a result, the stat lines are a little bit lower. However, your deck is going to be more consistent than in those events, just because of the vanilla 2Ks being good on-curve plays. And there are also a lot of interesting effects in this set. Lots of stuff that requires a lot of events, be that in hand or in trash, as well as a lot of type-locked cards. So I really think Rainbow Luffy deck building, this set in particular, is going to be quite interesting, and I'm excited to give it a go. Finally, in terms of whether you should go first or second, a lot of the times I try and recommend either one curve or the other. In this set, I think it's very much going to depend on your personal pulls. There are a lot of good 5 costs and a lot of good 6 costs that you're going to potentially have access to. The 3s and 4s are not as prevalent. 4 costs probably slightly better than 3s, but what curve you prefer, I think is just going to depend on your card pool. If you pull a lot of good 5s, try and go first. If you get a lot of good 6 cost characters, try and go second. Now that's it for this guide on the OP12 pre-release event. If you've got any more tips for people, drop them in the comments below. Good luck with your pulls, good luck at your events, and thank you for watching. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day.